What's up and welcome to Ahead of the Curve. This is your host, Jonathan Gelner, and thank you so much for joining us today. This podcast is powered by Stick and Ball TV, the baseball and softball streaming platform. If you're a coach and you're looking to get better, then Stick and Ball is just for you. With weekly updated videos from some of the best baseball and softball coaches in the country, it's a no-brainer. Check them out at stickandball.tv or on the Stick and Ball TV mobile app. On today's show, we have on Rachel Folden, minor league hitting coach for the Chicago Cubs, and she is the first female in the Chicago Cubs organization to do so. She also recently launched EliteFastPitch.tv, which is the most comprehensive hitting drill library available for softball players. Now, players from all around the world can train with Rachel and her team. A little background on her. Rachel is a former professional softball player and national pro fast pitch, and she was drafted out of Marshall University after being a four-time NFCA Division I All-American. Rachel still currently holds Marshall career records in batting average, hits, home runs, RBIs, total bases, and walks. On the show, we discuss what the transition into professional baseball was like for her. We discuss what it's like to coach male athletes and female athletes, and we take an in-depth dive into training timing and adjustability. You're going to love this episode with Rachel Folden. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I've been a follower of yours for a while, and I'm excited to get to dig in with you today. And so for those, listening who may not be familiar with you, you are one of the first women who was in professional baseball as a hitting coach. And you just mentioned that you're going to be, in the AZL next year again with the Cubs. But I do want to talk a little bit about what the transition was like into professional baseball for you. And so I mentioned off the mic that I went back and listened to an episode that you did with Justin Stone and Travis Kerber. Love those guys. And you talked about you were either like the first woman in professional baseball or like maybe one of the few. So like let's unpack that a little bit, because I'm sure that was just a crazy transition for you. And I'm just thinking of all like the craziness that goes along with that. But I'd love for you to hit on that for us.
Sure. So full-time coach, it was actually a tie between myself and Rachel Balkovec.
Oh, nice.
And
That's awesome.
There's kind of a cool story that goes on there, but there've been some part-time female coaches in the past. I know the Oakland A's have brought in two of them actually. So we've got Justine Siegel and Veronica Alvarez. Both of them have come in as guest coaches for the Oakland A's, and they're awesome. I have a friendship with both of them, which is really cool, especially going and navigating through this process for sure. But yeah, I was actually working on a consulting job with Elite Baseball with Justin and Travis. And at the time, Rachel was working with Driveline. And so she came and was doing another consulting project on the side. And so we were actually working with Northwestern softball team at the exact same time. Now, both of us had been hired by our clubs, but it wasn't official yet. And because they announce every hire at the same time. And so we both knew we had the job. We both thought we were the only ones doing it. And the Northwestern coaches are the only ones that knew that both of us had been hired at the same time. And so they kind of like whispered it around, and Rachel came up to me. She goes, "Dude, did you get hired by the Cubs?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I got hired by the Yankees." I was like, "Oh my God." And instantly I was like, "Oh, thank God it's not just me." So I gave her like a big hug, and we became friends after that, which is pretty cool. So it was just a really odd story that we were in the same place at the same time. But yeah, it's been a fun ride so far. Like there have been some things that I was not expecting. And then there's been a lot of things like just coaching is coaching. So that I was pretty prepared for. But I'm enjoying my time in baseball. I'd like to do it for a while for sure.
So so I know you played softball at Marshall, and I think you're in the Hall of Fame there, and just a subtle plug there for you. But did you always have a dream of being in professional baseball, or was it just something that you just saw how the tide was going and you were like, this would be an amazing opportunity? And because 10 years ago, I'm sure that I don't know if that had ever crossed your mind or not, but I'd love to hear more.
So I did want to be in professional baseball as a player when I was a kid, for sure. Come from a big baseball family, and I played Little League baseball. I played till I was 12, and then eventually I just kind of got shoved out of baseball. And at that time, basketball is my best sport. So I just was like, that's fine. I'll just go play basketball. And then ended up playing softball, and I've told the story a million times, but, just kind of like played softball because I was good at it and it was fun and it was a lot like baseball. And I really enjoyed being around women because when I played baseball, I was the only girl and it got old. Everywhere we would go, that was all anybody wanted to talk about. Oh, this team has a girl on it. And, oh, this girl's, she's pretty good. Like she can throw, she can do this, but it always came back to the fact that I was a girl. And so I never really got like credit for just being a baseball player. And so, but I've always been a baseball fan. I've always kind of framed my coaching in a sense of softball kind of always gets the watered down version of things and baseball seems to be on the forefront of things. And so I've really tried to stay and learn a lot from baseball and never really leave that space just because I love it. I'm a huge fan of the game. I watch games all the time. And so did I always want to work in baseball as a coach? No, that kind of came along the more that I got involved with Justin and his company with Elite Baseball. And when he brought me in, he said, well, we want to really like use you to push our softball side of our business. And I just said, well, if I'm going to be involved in the softball side, I want to be involved in the baseball side too. And he said, okay. And so once I started working side by side with the baseball side of things, it was a very natural transition into that. Just, I don't know if it's just because of my personality or just because I had really great leadership and all the stars kind of aligned where it was just a really, really good fit. And so, when Justin went and he got hired by the Cubs as the director, it was all of a sudden, like when he needed to fill major league or minor league hitting coach positions, I was a very natural fit for that. And so when he asked me, he was like, hey, do you want to interview for a hitting coach position? And I was like, yeah, like that sounds great. And I had no idea what the heck I was getting myself into. I just knew that I could coach a little bit. And so went through the whole interview process and got the job. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, I love that. And I love hearing the background behind it. And it's just, it's so cool. We're in such an interesting time in baseball. And one of the things that again, alluding to the previous podcast that you did, you talked about, okay, the differences between the baseball and softball swing, which there's not one. And then you mentioned, hey, we've been solving the rise ball problem for, as long as you've been playing. And so tell us a little bit more about that for, I'll put the link to that podcast in the show notes for those wanting to go listen to that. But that really intrigued my interest. So go into more about that, please.
About like how we're working on hitting the rise ball?
Yeah. I'd love to hear that.
So it's pretty funny because you see like, I was watching the World Series this year and you see like Travis d'Arnaud hitting with a split grip bat, right? And it's got the tape in the middle. So there's that. And then you see like hitters start to like Nelson Cruz hits with a split grip. And so you see these players go to it and everyone thinks it's like this revolutionary thing. And it's like, I literally played with like 4 or 5 teammates that like hit like that full time and they always have. And so when I would face Monica Abbott, who threw 78 miles per hour in her prime, and you're just trying to catch up and everything's going up because she has really ridiculous spin on her ball. It's like, I'm just splitting my grip and just trying to get a barrel on top of the ball. And that's essentially what it's like for a lot of guys hitting a high velocity, back spinning fastball. It's essentially the same thing. And so, you do have a lot of experience with that. Now at the level I coach right now, we're not seeing a ton of, super high RPM, top of the zone fastballs with command. We'll get them. We'll face guys that throw 95 to 100. We do face those guys on occasion, but they don't have a lot of command at the lower level at rookie ball. So they're not going to like just sit there and live at the top of the zone. But it does, the way that we train is obviously we're training guys to get to the next level. And so we do prepare them for that. And we do a lot of split grip drills. You're seeing that a lot in baseball. A lot of people are adopting that. It helps you get some feel for not losing the barrel behind you and staying, on top of the ball or however, and whatever terminology the hitter wants to use. But that's been very effective training since I played softball in college. That was like a thing that we did, right? If you had a girl that threw hard and she threw rise balls, split your hands and give yourself a chance. And so, it's kind of cool to watch, baseball, the softball world takes so much from baseball because baseball has the money to have the technology and tell us what's happening in the game and then work backwards from there. And it trickles down to softball. It's kind of cool to see softball kind of providing something to baseball. And I don't know if baseball is actually taking it from softball. I know I am, just because that was my experience as a player, but it is kind of fun to see.
I'm going to fully admit that I live in a softball state, and I'm starting to realize that, with the World Series, College World Series being here, and then University of Oklahoma doing so well, that, when I was growing up, it was all about Oklahoma football, but it's crazy in Oklahoma during the College World Series time. And it's been really cool, and getting to know JT. I mean, those guys absolutely mash, and we talk about all the same stuff all the time. And it's just so interesting how much of it's not a divided thing anymore. It's there are differences, and you've alluded to that as well, but it's just so interesting of how much of a correlation there is between the two. And softball's a lot of fun to watch. It's so fast paced.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy doing both. I appreciate the history of baseball and how much it's evolved over the years, and getting to watch that happen, decade to decade, right? You just see like baseball when, I grew up in the 90s and, in the steroid era. So it was just like ridiculous. Right. And then you watched it just like come back to the, heavy on the contact. Right. And then you started to see the power take off again, and strikeouts went up again. And now I think you're starting to see it come back to more of a contact heavy approach by a lot of guys. And we're seeing a lot of value to that. And you watch it in softball too. And softball right now, for lack of a better term, is in their steroid era, where everything's just leaving the yard, right? Because hitting is way ahead of pitching right now. And I'm not saying the softball players use steroids, just so everybody's clear, but we're in an era where balls are leaving the yard with regularity, and I think you're going to start to see it come back down too. I like coaching both of them, just because it gives me a different perspective on how to coach. It just adds another like tool to my toolbox that I get to coach both. So I do, like, in the off season, I primarily work with softball players.
No doubt. That's cool. So if there are coaches out there that are listening, because you've been able to do both, and we'll get into a lot of baseball stuff here in just a minute. But if you were gonna give advice, because I've never coached girls, and so if you're gonna give advice and you've been able to coach girls and boys, which is coming from a female, is very rare. But I would love to hear, what are your thoughts on what the differences are between how to coach? Because we talk about coaching to the individual all of the time. And I've experienced a lot of coaching males has been the only thing that I've ever done. And so it would be completely different, I would think, just based on personality for girls. But I would love to hear what has been just some different things that you've noticed between coaching males and females, and how do we get the best out of both?
So this is a great question. I think the challenge for female athletes, especially when you start coaching like high school players or college players, is you're fighting how they've been coached in the past. And unfortunately, for some reason, people are very much okay with their boys doing hard things and failing, but they're not okay with letting their little girls fail. And so again, we teach them like the watered down version, just so that they can have some success. Whereas with boys, we're a lot more patient, and we can see the forest for the trees a little bit. And we can let them fail and stumble through their youth years. And so to me, as a human, as an individual to individual, the gender makes no difference to me. Just treat them like a baseball player, treat them like a softball player, whatever sport they're playing, and understand that like that particular individual has certain things that they're dealing with, or certain things that they need to overcome. Right. And so it does become just more individualized based on person to person, but I don't think it necessarily has to do with gender. But you'll find a lot of like softball players just like haven't had access to good coaching, because most people just want their girls to be okay and not fail versus being great. And I think that is an obstacle that as a coach myself, I've had to overcome, is, when we start introducing creativity and variability training, which comes with a lot of failure, the girls initially they panic. And I see that with the guys a lot too, but the guys, you could see it's like a lot of them are like, okay, like fine, if this is how it's going to be, then we're going to play, and we're going to figure out a way to beat this drill. Whereas a lot of girls will just kind of like crumble because no one's ever let them fail. No one's ever let them try and fail. And so I think that there's the way that girls and boys are kind of raised, or, their coaching village, I think contributes to that. And it does bring a different dynamic to the table for sure.
I love hearing that, and thank you for going into that, because again, I've never coached female athletes, so I was curious. But you did mention adjustability training and chaos training, whatever you want to call it. I would love to go more into that, and so let's talk a little bit about this time of year. We're in the preseason. We're getting guys and gals geared up, ready to go. And I know here in Oklahoma, we start scrimmaging in about a month and a half. And so you're thinking spring training. Most of the people around the world, especially in the South, are gearing up, ready to go. So what should we be doing this time of year? And then we can kind of expand off of that.
So if you're like a youth player, in my opinion, right now, you should like be resting and resting your baseball muscles, for lack of a better term, or resting your softball muscles. So giving your arm a break, giving your swing turning one way, like give it a break. But I think you should be working on your body. And so usually in the off season, in the winter time, is basically the only off season that youth players have nowadays, right? They play all year round. They find tournaments in domes, and they travel to California, to Florida, and then they don't get an off season. And so right now is like that 1 month window right around like Thanksgiving to Christmas, where people kind of like take it in, they slow down, they maybe spend some time with their family. So like, I don't think we should stop training, but I think we should stop throwing and stop swinging right now, aside from like maybe the occasional like one-on-one lesson or, class or whatever, but it doesn't need to be every day like it is in season. And so, right about, for a youth player, I would say right about February is where you can start to ramp your training back up a little bit, to taking the weights, like getting them to like where you would max out a little bit, or getting to your like maximal strength level for wherever you're training, and then start to taper off and introduce more skill training, and then more of a maintenance for your strength training. Now, as a pro player, there's people that have way more knowledge on this than me, but usually what we see is a slowdown of activity right around like October, like right after the season's done. And then they usually start to pick back up like middle to end of October. So they give themselves like a month-long blow. If they're a major league player, it's usually they start right around like Thanksgiving time. And then that's when they start to start swinging again, and ramping back up. So it's different. But I think training, you should work on your body all year round, and it doesn't mean that you have to go hard all year round. There's a lot of recovery that goes into it, but I think your body should be something that you keep in good shape all year round. That's just how I think it should go.
No doubt. So we're actually getting ready to start ramping arms up and getting ready for scrimmages. And so I'd love to hear, you talked about, I maybe it was my term, chaos training, but getting guys and gals ready from an adjustability standpoint, from a timing standpoint. So if you would just kind of open up the box of things that you can share, and just different ways that you like to train those things. And yeah, we'll just go from there.
So like how I like to do it, and I think it makes things organized. It makes things like, you should always have some sort of like hitting routine that you can always go back to. Now, your routine can change over time, but there should be like a designated 10 to 15 minute period every time you hit, where it's like, these are my drills that I need to get me right. And for whatever reason, they could be very basic, from I hit outside tee, I hit high tee, like that could be very basic, or it could be like I swing and I have no stride, split grip, stop and extension. Like those are drills I need to get me right. And so what I like to do is help people, and it's a conversation with the player, and there's movement screens and everything. Let's find a routine that's going to help you get from A to B. And so if you get to B, we'll revamp your routine to get you from B to C, right? If need be. If you don't want to, that's fine, right? But it's a conversation. Let's figure out a routine. And then, but I think every day the accuracy of your barrel should be challenged. And so there are so many hitters that swings are not aesthetically pleasing or necessarily mechanically correct, that they can put a barrel on a baseball or a barrel on a softball and they hit. And so there's value to that. And I do think that that's trainable. I think for a long time, we thought that was like something you were born with, just like we thought for a long time that the power tool was something that you were born with. But I do think it could be taught. I've seen it. I've seen barrel accuracy improve quite a bit. And I think that that should be challenged. So, you know, instead of just, you know, you see it all the time on the internet, the standard like underhand flips and like coach feel good BP, like there's time and a place for that, but it's not as much as we've done it in the past. And I think we're starting to move away from that as an industry, and challenging the accuracy of your barrel. I think you should be able to, every time you pick up a bat, the accuracy of your barrel should be challenged, because that's what you're doing in a game. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't mean you have to hit live. It doesn't mean you have to see 100-mile-per-hour heaters at the top of the zone. That's not what I'm saying. There's value to that too, but at some point, like, challenge the accuracy of the barrel, make the bat longer, make the bat shorter, make the bat heavier, make the bat lighter, change where you're standing, change how you're standing, change what you're standing on. There's so many ways to do it. And I think, you know, that variability training really, really helps you build good bat to ball skills, which that's hitting, is being accurate with your barrel.
Yeah. And I'll allude to, for the nth time, the podcast you were on, and you talked a lot about different angles too. And I want to throw that out there, because I love going at different angles, just helping them with working on their path and things like that. And you can go into more of that if you'd like to. Up
I mean, I love angles. Like, there is not a drill. If you're hell bent on doing drills, there's not a drill that I like or probably use more than like a closed angle toss. Like, so if you're a right-handed hitter from the shortstop side of the pitcher, or if you're a left-handed hitter from the second base side, like that, you cannot hit the ball to where, you know, we put targets out there, give them a visual of where they're trying to hit it, but like, you cannot hit it to the opposite field gap unless your path is solid, or unless you have very good awareness of your contact point. So like, to me, that drill really exposes a lot of swing flaws to be able to do it consistently correctly. And then if you're doing like an open angle toss, or, you know, some people call it like a front hip drill, like where you're throwing at the front hip and you can stay inside the ball and drive it up the middle, that to me is also another good sign of like, you have a really good path and you have an accurate barrel. Because if you don't, either that ball is going to jam you and get in on you, or you're just going to snap hook it, you know, and get around the ball, which you can do because it's just tossing, whatever. But that's when you know, okay, you've got this down. Now let's progress it and move to the machine. Let's do angle machine, or let's do angle BP, overhand. You know, you can progress it from an underhand flip. But I think like, as a hitting coach that doesn't want, you know, sometimes you don't really necessarily want to mess with swings. Maybe you just want to expose the flaw and let the player ask for help. Angle toss is a great way to do that.
No doubt, because if their path is bad, they're eventually going to be like, okay, what am I doing? And so you're like, okay, exactly. Cool. This is a good conversation starter. No, I love challenging with different angles and stuff like that. And then you like, I've even seen guys who are like, hey, we're never going to see this angle. And you're like, yeah, I mean, you're right. Like Chris Hale's not even on this, but this could mimic a slider moving away from you, or a slider moving into you, and you having to adjust your barrel to hit it more out front or a little bit deeper, you know, whatever it is. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, you've been the lead lab tech, and just from reading that online, I have no idea what that entails. And so it's super intriguing, but I would love to hear, I don't know if you still are, and I'd love to hear more about that too. But I just want to know, like, what are some things that really caught your attention and were really surprising to you?
I think that's like I think it was a title given just because I was going to be in Arizona all year. And so if we needed to fly someone in to use the hitting lab, or if we needed someone to like always be all hands on deck to run the hitting lab, I was there permanently. Every hitting coach in our organization knows how to run the hitting lab. And so, which I really, our organization does a great job at that. What goes into it? Some stuff I can tell you about, some stuff I can't tell you about.
Of course.
We have markerless motion capture. Cool. We have like force plates. We use K motion. We use blast. We use a variety of tools depending on what we're trying to pick out. So, you know, what I like about us is we have a very, very integrated organization. So if strength and conditioning flags something and it shows up in their swing, we can work very hand in hand with them, and we have data to back it up. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is just come up with the things that every player needs to be successful. And if that is, hey, you're late on the fastball, and every time you get a fastball, you're late on it, and you're crushing off-speed pitches, sliders, changeups, you're crushing it, but you're late on the fastball, and that player doesn't believe you, it's like, okay, well, let's get in the lab and we'll show you. And so we can use it to basically make our jobs easier and to communicate with the player, and always have, a bullet in the chamber that when the player questions, like, hey, I don't know what that means, or I don't feel that, then we can show them. And so a lot of it is a very integrated approach with R&D. R&D will come to us at times and say, hey, we've noticed, this is wrong with player this, and we would like you to work on it. Well, we can get in the lab. And the cool part about it is, because we have so many cameras in there, and video is like the greatest way to connect to the players, right? Like there's data and graphs, and I geek out about that as a coach. Most of our coaches in our organization do. And we love to look at it and really dive and dig deep into it. But the player is really just going to say, okay, but like, how does this translate to my swing? And so we have to be able to understand it and give it to them. But yeah, I think our hitting lab is next level with what we have in it. And I'm really proud of it. And the lead lab tech title just means when needed, we can all turn everything on and make sure that it's running smoothly. And then someone else collates the data and everything. Our R&D department has built a insanely good data collection system that we all have access to, and it really makes our life easier. So they're more the lead lab techs than I, let me tell you that.
Sure. No, and so one of the questions and one of the things that I think is really interesting with tech is, you said that a lot of it is integrated. So you have a lot of different things, and then you can kind of filter them down and kind of see how they all work together. Is there value in having one or two pieces of tech without a whole lot of context? Because that's why I feel like, you see a lot of things that are going wrong, or maybe quick to jump the gun on some different things. It's because, we have a lot of tech. Let's say, we have, blast motion sensors, or we have a Rapsodo. And I just want to know, like, what are your thoughts on just grabbing certain data points versus, having all of that in context? Because I don't think we can. I don't think most amateur programs can have all of that stuff. So is there value in having different things for different things, or just how would we value that? Because you have the blast motion sensors, which doesn't really do pitch type or, what you're training, unless you really, really dig into it. You've got your Rapsodo, which, it measures outgoing data, but it doesn't necessarily have incoming data. And so there's always different things that it goes with. And so I guess, long story long, how do we use those effectively rather than just, trusting what the data is telling us without some of the context that it needs?
I have told everybody, and I get asked this question a lot, like, that's just going to confuse the players. Isn't that going to confuse the players? And it's like, well, we're measuring stuff, and we're only really going to look at it if we're prepared to coach it. And so if you're not prepared to coach what you see, then ignore that data. Because if you're not prepared to coach it, then it's useless, right? It's every time you hit a ball and put it in play, it has an exit velocity and a trajectory on it. But if you're not measuring every single ball, like, that's okay. You can see stuff with your eyes too. So, not everybody's got access to, a $1 billion organization that can build a hitting lab like I have, right? I've run my own facility for years now, and we had blast motion, a pocket radar, and I borrowed a K-vest, a K-motion vest, and just measured everybody, and like literally had no idea what I was looking for, but just tried to find correlations in it. But I also was prepared to coach it, if I saw something, I was prepared to coach it. So what I would say is, like, always start with like the stuff that like jumps out at you, like bat speed's an easy one, right? If you have a kid that's 10% less bat speed than everybody else on the team, well, start there. Okay.
Sure.
If a kid has, you can start with statistics, right? That's data. If the kid is batting 200 and wondering why he doesn't play, well, let's start there. Okay. Well, he's hitting 200. All right, fine. Now, why is he hitting 200? Now that's a deeper question. So now we got to work backwards from there. So I think it's just really, like you said, you don't need all of it, right? I don't need all of it as a coach. I shouldn't say. R&D, they need all of it, right? Because they're looking for correlations and they're looking for what works and what doesn't work. And that's their job. My job is I got to make it applicable to the player. So I don't need all of the info because I'm not going to give all the info to the player anyway, because I don't want to dome them up when they're in the box.
Right.
So my job is just to make it applicable. So I think it just kind of depends on where you fall as to who's looking at the data. Are you a coach? Are you analyzing the data? Are you collating the data? Like, what's your position? But I always say, like, don't use it if you're not prepared to coach it. Because if you're not prepared to coach it, you're just telling a player like, hey, your bat speed's 10% less than everybody else. And the player's like, okay, how do I get better? And you're just like, I don't know, swing harder. Like that's not going to cut it, right? You got to be prepared to coach it. Otherwise, just don't give it to them.
No doubt. And I like the approach of, okay, after taking all of these things into consideration, here's the one thing that we feel like is going to make the biggest impact. You hear lowest hanging fruit, and that's kind of been a buzzword the last couple of years, but I think it's so true of, okay, let's take what we have and then let's figure out, with video, with other coaches' opinions, with their opinion, with their mentality and taking all of that into consideration as well. But just, I think blindly trusting anything is a really hard way to do it. But just, for the coaches out there that are listening and they're like, oh, Rachel's got all of this different cool stuff. And you're like, at the end of the day, you're a coach and you're understanding what feel is like, and you're taking the players' emotions and opinions and previous experiences into consideration before you just go, hey, your external rotation on your lead elbow and ulnar deviation in your wrist. And you're just like, no. Like, here's what we're thinking. Here's what you think. And so I'd like to hear too. Have you had a player that you guys have flagged something and you've gone to them? And I would love to hear just what the opening to that conversation would be like, because, you're dealing with professional baseball players all the way down to youth kids. And so they've all had previous experiences. So what would a conversation starter be like with that? Because it's, again, asking them to change anything that they really believe in is really tough. So I'd love to hear advice on that.
I think, you got to build trust with the player. Like that. I got hired, and this is something I had to learn. And like everyone who knows me really well in the organization will probably tell you the exact same thing, is like, I used to be at the facility, so I got paid for my opinion, right? So people walk in the door, they're like, give it to me. Give me what you got. And it's like, okay, like that's why you're here, right? You're here and you're paying by the hour. So like, I got to give you the information that I can make applicable to you in an hour. When you go into pro baseball, you're like, these guys are already professionals. And so I've got to let them come to me, right? Before we just start going in hot. And a lot of times it's just like, hey, like, you got any kids? Oh yeah, I've got a daughter and she lives in the Dominican Republic, with my girlfriend. It's like, oh wow, congrats. How old is she? Just getting to know them as a player. And then the next day, hey, how's your daughter doing? Right? Remembering, let them know that you care. So first you got to build like that trust and let them know that you care. And then once you got them there, like I said before, it's like, sometimes, as a coach, you're like, this is a problem and this is going to be a problem. And it has been consistently a problem, but I can't tell you that because you're so married to your swing right now that like you're going to be resistant to the change. And I want this to be, it's always sticks better. It's stickier when it's their idea. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just create a drill that exposes whatever flaw they have. And when they can't do it and they get frustrated, they're like, what am I doing? Like, how do I do this? It's like, okay, so here's what I see. Okay. Now, remember like 2 games ago when that guy threw that, those 2 consecutive fastballs on the outside corner and you fouled them both off and you miss them, right? And that's like something that's a pitch that you normally like to hit. Yeah, I remember that. Okay, well, that's the same thing that's happening right now. So here, let me explain what I see. And they're like, oh my God, okay, now I feel it. But it's like, sometimes you got to let them come to you and say, hey, like, how do I do this? Like, how do I win the drill? And start there. And then you can build up and use context clues like, what's happened at practice and BP the previous day, or maybe what's happened in a game from a week ago, or they've been in a slump. And, every player wants answers when they're in a slump. The hardest part is when a player's like going well and that like they're just getting lucky, right? They're not getting exposed right now. Let's put it that way. And it's like, you don't want to diminish the hot streak because those don't happen very often. You don't want to like cut them down while they're up. But at the same time, you're just putting stuff in your back pocket and you're just putting stuff, Andy Haynes, he just got hired by the Pirates actually. I know him pretty well and I listen to him speak and he's like, all you're doing is just saving your bullets. And so when that player comes to you, you better be ready to shoot and you better have a bullet in the chamber ready to go. And you just save your bullets. Oh, there's a bullet. I'm just going to put it here. And when that player comes to you, you have to be ready because they're not going to give you 2 hours to explain it to them. They're going to give you like, give me something that I can use right now because I got to go play tonight. And so, you gotta have that feel of a coach of like, here's what I see. Do I say something or do I hold on to it for a minute and let them come to me? Because I think, baseball is notoriously patient, which I'm very, very grateful for. And youth sports are not. And so youth sports, like, my kid needs to get recruited now and she's 12. It's like, no, she doesn't, but okay, I understand. And so, it's a really interesting dichotomy, but it's really helped with like, I have to know when to speak and when not to speak. But most of the time it's just better when the player drives the bus, for sure.
No doubt. And that's the tough thing is I've been wrong on players too, because I've been like, that's not going to work. And then they end up hitting like 320 in the big leagues. Hunter Pence was like that guy for me. I was like, oh, man, this dude is just so lucky. And then, 10 years later and like 9 all-star game or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, I was wrong. And I think
right.
we've all had those moments for sure. So with the next thing that I really want to dig in with you is timing. And, you talked with, again, I love the podcast that you guys did. And so I'm just trying to pick different things to be able to go into that I thought were super good. And so we can go in more in depth about it. But you mentioned a Franz Bosch quote, and you talked about understanding the outliers so you can try and figure out how to time up things in between. And that's the very dumbed down version of Jonathan Gellner trying to understand Franz Bosch stuff. But dig more into that, because I feel like, man, it's trying to get players to understand this innate thing of timing other than like, hey, go on release or start on handbrake, and then we'll talk about contact points. But it's really a hard conversation to have because it's so internalized and it's so individual to the player. So I'm having trouble. And so I would love some help with this.
Well, we would all love help with this. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, if you could get our hitters to be on time like 10% more often, I mean, like that's a career changer, right? And that's such
Absolutely.
a small number, but that's a career changer. Like, the way I look at it, and I was a good hitter when I played, and like the way that I always approach timing is like, when do I start my move? So like timing of my movements, but then where do I need my barrel to be to hit the pitch? And so I think where a lot of players run into a trap, and I think we coach this way too, is like, well, the damage is done out in front of the plate. And it's like, okay, like that is true. Okay. That is 100% true, because more swings are uphill out in front of the plate than they are behind the plate. Like I get it. Okay. That's true. But when we talk to a player about that, are we telling them that they need to, like, are we taking a player that swings like, and I'm just going to use him as an example because he's got big moves, but swings like Javi Baez, and that player who tends to, in front of the plate, kind of like hook a bunch of balls or kind of get on top of balls a little bit. Are we telling that player to go get balls out in front because that's what's best for him, or just because that's what we think is happening? Maybe his contact point needs to be further back. He's got a big inward turn, so maybe his contact point needs to be further back. Now, here's the key though, is like, if you look at where the ball is when he makes contact and his body, it's probably the same distance or close to it as like a Mike Trout who needs to hit more balls out in front. It's probably the same distance from ball to chest or ball to hands or whatever fixed point you want to use. So it's like, we got to be careful as to like teaching guys to be early on everything when maybe that's not the best approach for them. And so it kind of goes back to when you go to the timing of movements, like your movements or your mechanics, I should say, and your approach have to match. And if they don't, it's really difficult. And you'll have a lot of guys that grow up especially kids that grow up in the United States, they have a very like oppo pushy approach, right? Mm-hmm. And then you tell them like, hey, listen, like your swing actually works better and you're going to have more power to the pull side. And then they're like, well, no, I hit the ball that way. And you're like, you have hit the ball that way, but you're going to hit better. And we know that because like, again, we can measure most things. And mm-hmm. so it's like, we know that, but so now the approach of the player doesn't match what their mechanics are telling them to do. And so their timing is going to be off. Right. Sure. So there's that aspect of it. But then there's also, like you said, like when to start and picking up the pitch, because the pitch is going to screw with our timing too. Mm-hmm. And so like, to me, the best way to do it is like start at where you need to make contact and work backwards from there. And so you can do that in the on deck circle. And then you can do that by challenging timing. And like we were talking about before, you can speed the timing up. You can slow the timing down. You said something before about like, well, the angle toss, like I'm never going to see that in a game. And it's like, mm-hmm. well, you're never going to see a pitcher throwing as slow as me in a game, but you figured that out. Like sure. You figured out how to hit my BP, like mm-hmm. I throw 55 to 60 miles per hour BP. Like you figured that out. So like make another adjustment. And right. So, that like you can make it slower, which in most cases makes it easier. And then you can make it faster, which in most cases makes it harder. And then you can work in between. You can also like expand the zone. Like I love having like rounds in BP of like, you cannot take a pitch. I don't care where I throw it. You have to swing at it. Like hit and run rounds, whatever you want to call them. But no take rounds are great for the hitter to understand like, oh, okay. Like I had to be on time to hit that pitch that was 2 inches off the plate outside. And mm-hmm. so it kind of like builds their awareness that way. But yeah, timing is the one thing that I think it keeps a lot of players from being really, really good. Yeah. And, we're really good now at making swings pretty efficient, mm-hmm. but how people pick up the ball, the human aspect of it is freaking difficult. And you know what? Pitchers ain't making it any easier on us.
No, not at all.
Like it's crazy how like deceptive pitchers are now and how much they can just like, even like a Johnny Cueto altering his leg lift every once in a while, and just getting someone to feel uncomfortable. Like when you're not locked in, it's hard to hit that way. And so, right. It's a very interesting, there's so many variables that go into it. And I wish I had a good answer for like, this is how I coach timing, but I don't. Every player's a little bit different because sure. some players are innately good at it and some players really struggle with it. And you just have to like keep drilling with it. If you have players that are late on fastballs, keep exposing them to fastballs, and if they're at the big league level, and I mean, I don't coach at the big leagues. I'm not even going to pretend like I do, but I'm just saying, if you have someone later in their career who has been late on fastballs their entire life, but they've still been successful, well, it's like, okay, well then go hunt off speed pitches and hope you don't get a fastball. You kind of are who you are at this point, so, go do what you got to do. And, there's a lot of ambush hitters that have a lot of success for a long time in the big leagues, because they don't miss fastballs when they get them. And that's the pitch that they look for. So, you can have holes. You just got to manage your holes.
Right. No, and I think that's really good. And you talked about matching your approach to your timing. Did you mean like Justin Turner leg kick? And then you've got like, I'm thinking Daniel Murphy of this, like the toe touch, they're going to have two different timing mechanisms.
Yeah. I mean, I would think so. I would think the gather to me that can be at your own pace, like the gather or like the negative move or whatever terminology you want to use when you're kind of like at the beginning of your leg lift or you're starting to load into your back hip. Like that to me is different for everybody as to when you start, but the forward move is almost always the same.
Sure.
So like, or it's very, very close. A lot of times at ball release, someone is already on their way forward. And with the exception of I'm sitting on a Zach Greinke curveball and maybe I'm just going to like, what I'm saying? Like there's obviously going to be differences to it. But the forward move, I think, is the thing that hitters struggle to time the most. And I think that's what gets people in trouble.
Sure. Well, I'd love to hear, you mentioned having different tools in your toolbox for different pitchers that we see with different timing mechanisms that are tunneling. And I love the game planning aspect of it. And I think, when you coach, and I haven't coached for 40 years like some guys have, but we've been going through different cycles. So I think we're around the same age. So around like the mid 2000s, when the iPhone came out, everybody started really digging into video and figuring out, okay, what does efficient mechanics look like, and what are the pros actually doing versus, when my dad, who played with Clemente, was telling me to swing down and like roll my hands over at contact because that's what Clemente did. And so like looking back, I'm like, oh, well, now I can see why he did that, because he swung a log. And so he had to feel that. But anyways, going off topic here, but like the mid 2000s, 2010, 12 ish was like the mechanics era. And now all of our kids have grown up in that era and the data and tech era. And so they're losing some of the innate side of things. So the game planning and the backyard baseball type stuff, which it's not a bad thing. It can be a competitive advantage for us, but it's different conversations that I'm having now than when I used to. And now it's like, we talked about timing. Hey, what pitch are you seeing? What pitch would you see in this count? What are they going to try and do to you here versus when you're where you're at in the lineup versus what pitches are getting you out? And they're not thinking and having those conversations, which again, use that as an advantage. If you're listening to this going, yeah, I have that. If you're listening to this, it can be a competitive advantage for us, but I think that it's different. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you are helping your players with game planning too. And plus you've got the added bonus of a lot of your players are Spanish speaking. And so it's going to be a different conversation with them. And some of them, you're going to have high school kids, you're going to have fresh out of, college, Ivy League schools kids. So you got this big mix of, and you might have 16-year-olds and 22-year-olds, who knows, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on, how do we, communicate a game plan? How do you communicate, what pitches that are seeing? What do those conversations look like? And I know that I just threw a lot at you when we could have a whole episode on this, I'm sure, but dig into that a little bit with us.
Well, so like at the AZL level, or ACL, we call it now, like the Arizona Complex League, we don't always have the advantage of knowing who's pitching that day until about 3:00, and we play at 6:00.
Oh, nice.
So there's not a lot of game planning that goes on. As soon as we know, I give the information out to the guys in whether it's printing out a sheet, and just sitting there, and while they're warming up, running back to the office and typing something up that they can use in the game. But a lot of it, I think, especially at the lower levels and the youth level, when it comes to game planning, is like having a player understand their identity as a hitter. That can go a long way with just, what am I good at? If I'm good at this, then let me stick to that plan until the pitcher forces me to upset my plan. Right. Sure. So if I was a lefty hitter in softball, and because of the way the arm angle comes through, most pitchers are right-handed. They're going to miss arm side. It's common in baseball too that we miss arm side, but I just saw a ton of pitches away from me. And so I got really good at hitting them, and I could go left center. I could go over the fence, left center, whatever. So I knew that about myself. So I knew that was what I was good at. So I was willing to give up the inside part of the plate in a lot of cases, because I didn't care if the pitcher had that. If they made one mistake over the outside part of the plate, that was going to be my pitch. And I just had to make sure that I didn't miss it. Mm-hmm. So I wanted all the information, and I want my guys to have all the information too, to be honest, especially because as they get older, those pitchers have so much information on them. To me, it's like, well, it's the least you could do to have all the information on the pitcher too. But have that, and at the youth level, you don't know who the hell's pitching unless you're playing a high school game and you know that so-and-so's the Friday guy, or college and you're so-and-so's the Friday guy, and it's like, okay, I know who's pitching that day. As a youth player, you're like, it's travel ball, we play again at 1:00, I don't know who we're playing yet, and you don't know until you show up to warm up. And so it's like, what I like to do is like always make sure that as a hitter, you know what your identity is and what you do well. And that will take you a long way, because once you get one time through the order, you should have a pretty good idea of what the pitcher's doing now. Sure. And so now it's like, okay, do I have to upset my plan? or can I stick to my plan because this is what I'm good at and play to your strengths? You know, I think a lot of times we play defense with the bat in our hands instead of playing offense. We forget that it's an offensive game that we're playing when we're up in the batter's box. And so we end up playing defense based on like what the pitcher's going to do to me instead of playing offense of like, I'm going to force the pitcher to throw me my pitch, you know? So there's a different mindset to that too.
Sure. No, I really like that. And a lot of things that we're trying to implement now is how pitches feel. And I know that was something that in dugouts, whenever we were growing up, that was communicated really well. And I don't feel like that is right now. Again, we didn't have any data to go off of. And so now it's, you know, hey, this guy's, it's quick out of his hand and he's got a lot of ride to it. Okay, cool. Now we know what that means. And again, using that as just a way to create a shared language and a bond and something that if we have nothing about the guy, then we can at least get a couple people through the lineup and, you know, figure it out from there. But I really like that. And I've got a couple questions before you go. I know you're super busy, but I really want to dig into, you know, some personal learning that you're doing. So I'd really love to know something that you have learned lately or something that you've been digging into lately that's gotten you really excited.
You know, honestly, like this is going to sound so funny because I'm on a podcast where everyone wants me to give them information. The thing that I've been digging into the most is work-life balance, dude. Like, I'm going to be honest, like baseball has given me, especially professional baseball, that we grind hard through the season and we value our off season and we value our family time and we value our off season time. And as a facility coach, you can't, right? Like you can't do that because if you're not working, you're not making money, right? If you're literally getting paid by the hour. And so I've been just like grinding like 6 days a week for 10 straight years and no off season. And it's like, now that I'm in baseball, we value the off season and we value like personal growth. And so I'm starting to get to detach from it a little bit more. And it's hard for me because admittedly, like this has been we talk about routines, like it's been a routine of mine to just be like, dude, 6 days a week, like, let's go to work. And I have people asking me for lessons. I'm like, yep, I'll take you. We'll add it on to the end of the night. And then I'm there till 10:30. And it's like, I don't do that anymore. And that I'm really, really embracing that. And I'm a lot happier. And to be honest, I think I'm a better coach because of it. So I have a lot more time to listen to podcasts like yours, which I think is the best baseball podcast on the internet, to be honest. And,
awesome.
You know, I listen to it a lot and getting to dive in and listening to other people talk and have time for conversations, I think is very, very important to me now. And something that I'm really grateful for baseball that it's given me that time.
Sure. No, I'm right there with you. New Year's resolution is trying to figure out a way to be a continuous learner without, you know, making my brain mush. And so I love that. Second question is, what is something that it doesn't have to be recent, but what is something that you've changed your mind about? And I think we all have theories and we all, you know, we're continuously trying to push the envelope and the issue of getting things more right. But what's something that you've either recently changed your mind about or you changed your mind about in the past?
Let's see. That's a good question. I would say, from a hitting perspective is, I guess just being more open to like listening to other people, like, because again, like in baseball, it's a corporate structure, right? There's hitting coaches, there's hitting coordinators, and then there's directors, and then there's directors of player development, and it's a chain, right? So at any given time, we've got 7 guys looking at one player swing, right? 6 or 7 guys, and we can pick the brain of all of them. And like one thing that I've really embraced is I don't have to be right all of the time because I have help. Right. And so like one thing that I've changed my mind about is like, and it's not an ego thing. It's not like I need to be the reason why. I need to be the person that tells this guy that makes the swing change that he goes and makes the big leagues. I don't care. Like, to be honest, I've never cared. It doesn't bother me. But I don't have to like lose a ton of sleep at night wondering how I'm going to get this guy right and just internalizing everything. It's like, now I can just pick up the phone and call somebody and be like, hey, can you take a look at so-and-so? Like, so just being more like proactive about asking for help. That's something that doesn't come very naturally to me. And so, because I've always had to do things, myself, that's just kind of, I've run my own business. I just try to do things myself. And so leaning on other people I've learned to do that. And I will never unlearn it forever. I will always call and ask for help, because I think that's just something that I hope everybody's surrounded by good enough people where you can get a different perspective than your own. And yeah, and another thing too, I've actually said this before. I've never, ever, ever paid any, and I'm talking since I've been coaching. I was a college coach in 2009. That was my first job. I've never cared about how someone stood in the box. I'm just no, that's you, man. You stand however you're comfortable. Don't care. And you realize now that how you set up can affect everything that happens in the chain later, and how you can get into certain positions. And so that is one thing where I went from I don't care to let's make sure the setup is correct, because you can control that. The ball's not flying at you yet. I'm in the box. I can control that. So let's make sure we get that correct. That was a big change for me too, is holy crap. How many kids did I let slip through my fingers just because their setup was off, and that's something that I've learned and really started to pay attention to. Sure.
So 2 comments. First one, on your first answer, could not relate to you more than that, asking for help. Man, that's tough for me. And so we'll have to continue that dialogue with that journey. Second thing is I feel the same way. So are you talking about setup in their body, how they are facing in relation to the pitcher, with the whole thing? Okay. And then with relation to the plate as well?
Yes, all of it.
In the box, front and back, all of it.
Yep. Are you putting yourself in a position to be as successful as your swing will allow you to be? Right. So, to give a very basic, crude example, if you've got a player that cannot hit a high fastball, right? They just, for whatever, they're under it every single time, right? And you just know it. You just hope you don't get one. Okay, cool. Sometimes it's okay, well, their natural feel is to just get their hands up here. It's I need to feel like I'm on top of the ball, right? And then they load and they have so much speed going downhill that they're just making the problem worse, right? So you're okay, I know this is going to sound weird, but maybe instead of starting with your hands up here, maybe start with your hands, used them as an example earlier, Justin Turner, start with your hands lower and allow them to work up so you can get on top of the ball versus making the problem worse, right? And now then there's the other guy where you're hey, try putting your hands up here, and all of a sudden he can hit the high fastball, and it's okay, so it worked. So it's just tinkering with those little things. And guys, sure, I find don't really push back too much when you tinker with their stance as much as they do when it's you start tinkering with their swing. There's a difference, right? They take really good ownership of their swing because they want to move fast, and when they feel restricted, that feels weird to them. But hey, take your hands from here and lower them to here. Guys are okay, I could try that. That doesn't feel too weird. Or hey, you know how you hit with a slightly open stance? Maybe even your feet out and start to stay, try to stay more neutral. It's okay, I could try that. They're much more open to it because it's low risk, right? It's you said before, it's low hanging fruit. It's low risk. But it can reap huge benefits just because it allows them to move into a better position.
No doubt. I couldn't agree more with all of that. And I would even throw in grip, how they grip the bat, because I think that's a really interesting thing too.
I had to give a 15-minute presentation on grip. We had our coaches give presentations, and I got grip, and I was how nice. The hell am I going to talk for 15 minutes on grip? And yeah. I figured it out. And you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. That's a hill that I will die on, is how people grip the bat. So I think that just puts you in such a bind when you're just not gripping it correctly. So I'm with you on that one.
Cool.
Yeah.
So last question, and we'll let you off the hook. But what is a drill that your players love that we can steal from you? And it could be your youth players, softball players, professional baseball players, any and all of them. But what is something that you want to leave us with that is just we can put into practice tomorrow?
I think a drill that players get the most excited about is we call it like a 90% drill. Okay. So basically, like if you have like a hit trax or a Rapsodo or a radar gun, or whatever, where you've measured exit velocity, we'll say, okay, this is your 90% round. So basically you're not allowed to swing at a pitch unless you can hit it at 90% of your max. So the kids like it because they're able to swing hard and they're trying to hit it. But it also, like, for me as a coach, I'm like, you're learning how to select the pitches that you can actually hit that hard, which is phenomenal. Like, you're only as good as the pitches that you swing at, right? So like, it's on the coaching end, I love it, but also on the player end, it's fun because it's like, oh, I can let it eat, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But then, and you think like, okay, 90%, they're going to swing out of their shoes and chase everything, but they don't. Because if they can't hit it 90%, they don't swing at it. And those end up being like 50-50 pitches that we probably don't want them to swing at very often anyway. And so it's a fun round that I really like to do, and something that obviously you need some tech to accomplish that. But another one that I really like is when you use a pitching machine, you can either go inside, outside, middle, or high, low, middle. And it's basically like kind of what we're talking about. Like here's the edge of the zone. Here's the edge of the zone.
I like that.
And then the last two rounds, here's the middle. And the last two rounds, they just rake. And it's just like, oh, okay. Like I get it now, because it was like, here's the edge, and edges are hard to hit, right? Like the top of the zone, the outside part of like edges are hard to hit. So the success rate is low. Second round success rate is low. They're probably better at one of those than the other. And then you just tee it up for them in the middle and they just rake. And it's just like, holy cow. And I really like that one on like game days. I think that one's a really good one.
No, I've been doing that lately because I feel like a lot of teenage kids feel like they can cover the whole plate, and like they can't. And so just understanding what you hit well and moving it back and forth and be like, okay, like you can't cover all 7 balls with which we use letters for all 7 letters either. And it's like, it's impossible. So when you're less than 2 strikes, where do we need to be sitting? And so that I'm going to steal that one from you. Because I really like that as well. And it just exposing them to, you know, what their swing is good at, and then just trying to hammer out, you know, what they're already good at. But Rachel, I couldn't have had a more awesome conversation with you, and looking forward to more. But I did want to leave you with the opportunity to talk to just our listeners. If you have anything that you'd like to tell them or anything that you'd like to leave with them, here's your chance. I'm going to mute myself and let you roll.
I just want to say thank you for having me. Seriously, I'm like a huge fan of this podcast, and you do a great job. So I appreciate it. And I'm honored to be on here and talk a little bit about hitting and, you know, do all the things I like to do. We just launched a website. It's called elitefastpitch.tv. And it's basically every drill I got on a website, and there's a drill filter and everything. So I highly encourage everybody to sign up. It's really important for me that the stuff that I do this with lessons and everything. I want it to be affordable, and I want it to be easy to use. And so that was really what went into the site. So if you guys want to check it out, I would appreciate it. But otherwise, just thanks for having me, Jonathan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Ahead of the Curve. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review wherever you are listening. I also wanted to remind you that you can find the video portion at the AOTC channel on stickandball.tv. Have a great week.